We have a lot of clients that have been married once, been married twice, maybe married 3 times or more, or they have kids from a previous relationship, a previous marriage, and now they get remarried. And so we would call that a blended marriage. And how's that going to affect your estate plan, right? Very common in today's world where you've got kids from different partners, and now you're together. And how do you deal with that, right? Who's going to get what? Can be a very complicated situation. It can be very difficult for the children when the parents pass away. It kind of also depends on the ages, right? So how do you plan for that? Well, right now I want to talk about when they're young, okay, when they're minors. I would almost say that when they're minors, it tends to be a little bit easier, right? Because when they're older, if you get remarried in your 60s, your 70s, and you've got adult children, those adult children might not have, you have separate children. One spouse has one set of kids in their 30s, one in the others in their 30s or something like that. They might not have grown up together, right? So that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult. But if you've got young kids, especially, let's just say 10 and under, they don't really know the difference at that point, right? Especially if they're growing up together, they might have some sort of relationship. So, but one thing that's different about minors, and here I'm talking specifically about Florida, and I think most states have some version of this, is you can't completely disinherit minor children, young children, right? You can't just say, oh, I want my new spouse to get everything and my young children to get nothing, right? Most people probably wouldn't choose to do that anyways, but there are some circumstances where maybe unintentionally that's what they end up doing. But the law is pretty favorable that you can't just completely disinherit them. So one of the things that you'll want to look at is how are you going to divide things up? How are you going? And it really depends on your situation. Are you coming into the marriage with your own house? Do you have assets? Do you have investments? What does your situation look like? And I know this is difficult for a lot of people, but one of the things you might want to look at doing is getting some sort of prenuptial agreement, right, with that new spouse as to who's going to get what. Because sometimes I'll have clients who come to me and they'll say, listen, what's mine is mine. She knows that everything that I have is going to go to my kids, and I know that everything they have is going to go to their kids, and that's all we want to do. And again, that may or may not work, but in Florida, you cannot completely disinherit your spouse either. So if you come to me wanting to do a will or a trust, and you don't have any prenuptial agreement in place, you don't have a postnuptial agreement in place, I can't say everything to the kids, nothing to the spouse. Because again, under Florida law, you cannot completely disinherit the spouse. The spouse is going to be entitled to something, even if you all agreed on it, right? Even if you all came up with that, the way around that, the workaround is to do some sort of prenuptial agreement, postnuptial agreement if you've already been married. So that's something you want to look at. But for the kids, the same situation. What do you want to happen? Because let's say that you've got 2 kids and your new spouse has 2 kids, different parents for each set of those children. What happens if you pass away first? And now everything that you had, maybe it was owned jointly, now goes to that new spouse, right? And what happens if your spouse, I guess they're not new at this point, but what happens if that spouse doesn't want to leave anything to those kids, right? Because he or she says, yeah, you know what, they're not my kids. I'd rather provide for everything for my children. I don't know if I want anything to go to those kids. Maybe they're over the age of 18 or whatever the case may be. That could present some problems. And so it's definitely something. Don't just assume because you have an amazing relationship with your spouse or because you have you think the whole family gets together. Stuff happens, especially when there's money at play, right? And when one of the persons passes away, they're not there to kind of, put their 2 cents in and kind of act as the mediator between everybody. So you want to have something in writing. So again, it doesn't have to be extremely complex. It can be very simple, but you want to have something in place. So again, this is just an area that I see a lot of fighting over. So if you've got kids from a previous marriage or a previous relationship, and maybe your new spouse doesn't have kids. Still, you want to plan for that, but maybe especially if your new spouse does have children from a previous spouse or previous relationship, you want to have something in place because it can get very, very messy after one or both spouses pass away.